So the first thing I think upfront would be, would love to know sort of your story. So a little bit about your background and why you ended up doing what you're doing. What was the inspiration, or why?
Why? So I came 2001 to MIT to visit Dan. So this is when I got to know him, Dan Ariely. And he immediately involved me in a bunch of projects, whether it's about handing out things for free and see how big the lines get, to, well, at some point thinking about, well, how honest or dishonest are actually our students, and how could we make them be more honest if we find that they are dishonest. And it's mainly through lots of inspiring conversations with Dan. I mean, he's just such an amazing person, full of ideas and creativity. And then around that time, 2003, 2004, this was also the time when all those big events with Enron and WorldCom happened. And this is then when we really thought, okay, it might be time to start working on this honesty and try to get a better understanding of what makes people cheat. Because what we thought was, it can't possibly be that those events that we were witnessing in the media all around us, that those were just committed by a few bad people. I mean, there's no question that there are good people and there are really, really, really bad people, but we hope that that group of bad people is rather small. And if we want to explain the kind of dishonesty that we were observing, it seems more reasonable that it might be the good people like you and me, who seem to sometimes fall off the wagon and do engage in some transgressions. And so the idea was, well, let's try and understand, how do we struggle in our daily lives with the goal on the one hand to be honest and think of ourselves as honest human beings, and witnessing all these temptations, and what happens when we do give in? How do we give in, and what are ways to bring us back? So,
Are you already studying psychology in Germany, or I know you're from Germany. That's about all I know. So a little bit more on the history would be great.
So my backstory: I studied business administration in Germany. I did a master's in it. Then I was a consultant for 2 years, and while I was doing the consulting job, I found myself a bit bored and thought, I was always more interested in theory. Why don't I try and pursue a PhD? And so I applied for a PhD program in Germany at the same university where I did my master's. They accepted me, and it was a PhD actually in business administration in consumer behavior.
Okay.
And I had only started for about a year. And then I started working. So at that time, it was very hip, very cool to work on how consumer behavior online is different from offline. Okay. Because the internet boom just started with those stores. Yeah. And so this was questions I was working on. And at some point, my advisor in Germany said, I can't really help you much with this because this is not my research area. Why don't you try and maybe email a few people whose papers you're reading and that you like? And one of those papers that I read was by Dan Ariely. And so I emailed him. I said, hey, I'm a PhD student in Germany. I need some advice with my dissertation. Yeah. And your work seems very relevant. Would it be possible for me to come by for a week and I show you what I have done, and you can give me maybe some feedback? I would really appreciate it. And, I was really, really lucky that Dan responded, and he just said, yeah, sure, why not? Come over. And here I went to MIT. And by the way, I had never been to the US before. I actually had no idea what MIT was, which is a good thing, because if I had known, I don't think I would have had the courage to send out that email. But after a few days at MIT and being around this really smart guy, I figured that the place is actually quite good. And so once I was there, it was just very it was amazing just to see how smart people are and how creative and what they were working on. And it was just so much more intellectual than what I had seen before. And I was very fortunate that I had the chance to become a research assistant, like a visiting PhD student, first of Dražen Prelek, who is one of Dan's colleagues at MIT. And then after that, I became an RA of Dan's. And so basically since 2002, so from 2002 to 2007, I had been working with Dan first as a visiting PhD student. Then I went back to Germany. I defended my dissertation. Then I came back to MIT as a postdoc. And and so this is how things started.
And now you're teaching, now you're a professor in Toronto.
Now I'm a professor. Since 2007, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Toronto at the Rotting School in marketing, but doing consumer behavior and behavioral economics, judgment and decision making. So everything when it comes to human decision making, what influences us sometimes, and so what influences us, and we are sometimes not necessarily even aware of it, and how can we maybe change the environment such that people make better decisions for themselves and for society.
So can you talk, like, my big interest lies in this, right? And I think through Dan's books, I think I'm often most reminded of how fallible we are, right? Mm-hmm. And how much we tend to confabulate and find a rationale or a reason supposedly for pretty much everything. So what I'm curious to understand is, as somebody who's studied this and probably seen the best and worst of human behavior, what have been a couple of the studies that you remember and you take almost to work every day? How have these changed your life?
Changed my life?
Yeah, what are the most memorable ones, right? And how have they changed your life? Because I'm sure they must have an impact, right? Being exposed to this.
I'm not so sure these experiments are changing much of my life, because what they do make me realize is that, yes, we are very fallible, and I can see in those experiments that we run, I can see in what ways we are fallible. But I'm not walking around with a constant reminder of these weaknesses and these situations where I might be transgressing. So I'm human like anybody else. I might have more knowledge, but when I'm walking around the streets, I'm making the same mistakes as you and anybody else.
But isn't that funny? I find it interesting you say that, because one of my big conclusions from Dan's book was that the more you know or are exposed to your own fallibility, the less transgressions you make, right? So I'm not sure if you've done a study with psychology professors, and I'm not sure if they're any more honest than people who are, I guess, less aware of their fallibility. What is your view and thought on that?
Okay, so if we define transgressions now as immoral transgressions, what we've certainly found is that when people are just more aware of their moral standards, of their norms, if they pay more attention to them, it's much harder to give in to temptations.
Yeah.
I guess I have to explain a bit more about the research. I know that you know it, but
no, absolutely.
Maybe not all of the viewers or the listeners.
Yeah.
So when we did the research on this honesty, what we very often did is we had participants in our lab, and we would give them a test that they could work on, for example, a knowledge test, and we would pay them for the amount of questions that they solved correctly. But then we would have maybe one group where we designed the questionnaire such that they could actually cheat. And we wanted to see how honest people are versus how many questions they claim they have solved, even though we could actually see afterwards, once they have left the lab, how many questions they've solved correctly. Yeah. And what we find is that when you give people the temptation to cheat, when you give them the opportunity to cheat for money, many people will cheat. So that's the bad news. But the good news is that many of them cheat only by a small amount.
Yeah.
right? I mean, there are, of course, those people that do not really care much about the morality. They see, hey, I can cheat, I can get away with. I'm in a situation where nobody can actually prove that I have cheated.
Yes.
Why don't I cheat all the way
Yeah.
and say that I have solved all questions and then I get the maximum amount.
Yeah.
So there is, of course, that group of people too,
yeah.
but it was very small. And so when we calculated the amount of money that we lost due to cheating, it was the money that we lost due to a lot of people cheating just by a small amount versus the few people cheating just cheating all the way. We lost much more money due to cheating of the large amount of people that cheated by only a small amount. So people like you and me who want to think of themselves as honest human beings, but who are sometimes tempted, we sometimes do give into cheating, but we will only cheat by a small amount, because if we only cheat by a small amount, we can use all kinds of, let's call them magical tricks that we have up our sleeves that we can use to convince ourselves that we haven't really done anything bad.
Yeah.
So I think one or two good examples to think of it is, if I see that you have some chewing gum on your desk and I want a chewing gum and you just left the room, if I take one, I can explain to myself, well, I really needed one. It's not a big deal. It's just one. He will not really miss it. You know, next time I will offer him one in return. It's fine. I can come up with all kinds of rationalizations why it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
If I want to take two, already a little bit harder, right? If I take the whole package, it will be really hard to convince myself that I'm doing this as an honest human being, right?
Yeah.
Or another example that we use in our paper is, if you needed a pen, it's easier to take a pen from work than to take maybe, let's say, $1 from the petty cash box at work to then buy it. You know, so situations sometimes are such that they make it easier for us to come up with justification, and it's easier to cheat.
Yeah.
And as long as we don't cheat that much, it's easier to use those tricks that we have handy.
Yeah.
And those tricks are like justification, reinterpreting what we did, or just simply trying to not even pay attention to our moral standards. So, you know, somehow suppressing that. And these tricks we can use as long as we don't cheat that much. So this was what we found when it comes to dishonesty. And so now I completely lost what your question was, because I wanted to first give you an introduction of what we found.
My question was twofold. My question was twofold, right? One was, you know, what are the most interesting results? And two, how has this impacted you, or has it impacted you?
Okay, now I know what I wanted to say.
So what? Yeah.
So as I said, one of the tricks is also to just not try and pay that much attention to moral standards.
Yeah.
But if you have constant reminders in your environment about morality, about moral norms, about your own values and moral standards, it will be harder to suppress those because they're just so salient in the environment. And so if you have to face them constantly, it will be harder for you to give in to temptations. And so, yes, I think a consequence maybe of the fact that I'm doing so much research on dishonesty is that I'm thinking much more about dishonesty maybe than many other people, dishonesty as well as honesty. And so I have it more on my mind. So from that perspective, it might be maybe a little bit harder to suppress that whole no standards. But if it weren't for that, any other knowledge that I have about justification and so on and so on,
exactly.
You know, I think if I'm really tempted to be dishonest and I can get a small benefit by just cheating a small amount, I think I'd be probably just like anybody else.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot on that, but that's exactly the question, right? Because, you know, one of the biggest things that it was actually a little disturbing, right? It is a little disturbing. Like, you know, I read the book and I was like, holy cow, you know, and obviously Sorry. But it's actually not that disturbing. You have to keep in mind what is really impressive is we are creating situations where people really. So an economist would say every single person in our experiments should cheat all the way because those experiments are really designed such that we cannot prove
that a particular person has cheated.
Yeah.
We can see on an aggregate level
Yeah.
how much it cheated, but we cannot prove, oh, you have cheated.
No.
So from perspective, it's actually very positive to see that despite the fact that people could cheat all the way, get away with,
Yeah.
the vast majority actually only cheats by a very small amount.
You see, wait, I'm not done yet. So I'll explain why I think it's disturbing. And I felt it was disturbing because I think it's pretty much the example that you pointed out, right? It's take money. And I remember the study where, you had somebody steal Coke cans versus, Diet Coke cans versus money, right? In a student dorm. I think that's a very good one. And I think one of the conclusions, right, that I came out with and that Dan talks about is if it's cash, when there's a direct relation, you find it very hard to cheat. And it's amazing because as a society, we are moving from cash to cashless. We are moving from, real world physical transaction to paperless online transactions, right?
It makes it easier than to cheat because you can justify it. You can.
And that's my point, right? And that's why you see more Ponzi schemes. You see, and for me, what was interesting is as a creator, right? As somebody who wants to build something and build systems, it almost seems like the way to go is, it almost seems like queues are the way to go. And I, like little queues. And the other day I was thinking about it when I was at my client's place, right? And, everywhere we had these little kind of queues, right? And there was like, wash your hands, do this, do that. I mean, at some point, a bit annoying. But, for example, it'll be like, please keep this thing clean. And, you do keep the thing clean, whether you like it or not, right? It acts as a subconscious thing. So that's the biggest thing I took away from it. I just took away from it as like, okay, whenever you build an environment, you want to build an environment with, with somehow values on the walls or something like that.
Values on the walls, reminders, just a question maybe, how important is honesty to your family? There is some beautiful research also in the UK showing if you just have some eyes and a picture of a pair of eyes, and it doesn't even have to be a real picture of eyes. It can just be two dots and two lines that almost it could be interpreted as eyes. People become more honest because now that it's unconsciously as if somebody is watching them. And yes, so cues I think is a good place to start. Although humans are smart, and I think at some point, in the long run, if they get tempted a lot, I think they would find again these magical tricks to even get around those cues. So maybe the key is to also change those cues once in a while.
And sorry, that was probably my next insight, right? That the cues need to change because after a point you start taking them for granted because then they're just part of the environment. But it's fascinating. It is fascinating, right? And to me personally, I just find it extremely fascinating. So let me ask a different question, just to change tack away from research. What has been, of course, it seems like you accidentally almost ended up where you ended up, right? What was the defining moment? What was something that what was the aha moment that said, okay, you know what, this is what I want to do for my life?
I don't think I have that kind of aha moment. It was just being surrounded by amazing people, and most of it really being surrounded by Dan and just seeing how much he loves his job and how creative academia can be, and what kind of important questions you can ask, and see how meaningful research can really be, was something that I realize that research is important when it comes to the sciences, but in my field of business administration, and in particular how I started out with, I didn't really think of it as such. And through then, I really came to see that there's much more to it, and that it can really have a societal impact that I got very excited about. And the more I saw, the less I could imagine. The less I could imagine doing anything else.
No, I mean, at least from somebody way on the outside, right, and very far away from research. Trust me, it's one of those things that I would generally run away from. When I do see the kind of work that you guys are doing, I do feel the same, right? It does feel very exciting, and which is also why I reached out to you. So that's really nice. I think I know you have to run, but I have two quick final questions. One of them is, we're always very curious about productivity hacks. I'm a big fan of little things that you do in a day that make you a little productive or help you run your day or your life better or make you happier. Are there any couple of these little routines or hacks that you use in a day or yeah, in general in your life?
Little hacks. I don't know if that qualifies as the kind of hack that you're asking for, but I'm trying to control myself and not have my email open that often, because I feel that keeps me from, well, it doesn't keep me from being productive, but it takes me out of my productiveness all the time. And every time when I see this little dot on my mail program, I see there is a new message. It's so hard to resist to not watch. So what I'm trying to do now, so I'm still training, so I'm not there yet. I'm trying to turn it off for a few hours when I really have to focus and so my ideal world is one where in the morning I check maybe for like half an hour, then it's off. I just do my work. And then again, I have maybe around lunchtime an hour. It's off. And again, I focus on work. And then in the evening, one more time email. But then that's it. That's the ideal world where I want to get to, because I think it would improve my productivity quite a bit. Not there yet.
Wonderful. And final question: is there, the whole idea behind these interviews is sharing ideas, right? So is there an idea or a thought that you would like to share with everybody, kind of watching, reading? What is something that has inspired you, or something that you feel you'd like to pass on?
There is this beautiful research that is summarized in a book that either just came out or is coming out, and it's by my friend Michael Norton from HBS and a collaborator of his. It's Elizabeth Dunn, and they have this book on money and happiness. I don't know what the exact title of the book is, but in their research, what they show is that what really makes people happy is, so when you have money and you spend it on yourself, there is no lasting happiness from that, and doesn't really give you much of a boost. But spending it on somebody else, that's actually where happiness comes from. I like that research quite a bit. And I'm not doing good justice here to the work. So you should actually maybe interview one of them and get the details on it. But it's beautiful work.
It's a fantastic idea. I mean, yeah, but thank you so much.